I was halfway through repairing a broken refrigeration system at one of my warehouses when my 17-year-old son called me crying. I had never heard him cry like that before. Not when he broke his arm playing football, not when his dog died, not even when his grandfather passed away. But that night, his voice was shaking. "Dad, can you come get me?" I dropped my wrench immediately. "What's wrong?" There was wind in the background. A lot of wind. "I'm outside." My stomach tightened. Outside where? Grandma's house. I checked the time. Thanksgiving dinner had started almost 2 hours earlier. My wife, Melissa, had insisted on taking our son Ethan ahead of me because I was dealing with an emergency at work. "Why are you outside?" Silence. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Grandpa told me to leave." I stood up, so quickly I slammed my head against the pipe. "What happened?" Ethan sniffled. "He started making fun of you again." That wasn't unusual. Melissa's father, Richard, had spent the last decade treating me like I was beneath him. He'd always assumed I was some struggling maintenance worker. I'd never corrected him, mostly because Melissa asked me not to. "They won't understand your business," she'd always say. "Just keep things simple." Simple. That single word had cost me 10 years' respect. You see, I wasn't a maintenance worker. I owned the company. 10 years earlier, I had started Titan Logistics with one used truck and $20,000 I'd saved working double shifts. By the time this story began, Titan operated 3 distribution centers and generated more than $20 million annually. Most people knew me as the founder. Melissa's family thought I supervised loading docks. The lie had started small. Then it became permanent. And every year it got worse. Richard loved humiliating me. He called me the warehouse guy. He joked about my clothes, my truck, my hands, everything. I tolerated it because I loved my wife. At least I thought I did. That changed on Thanksgiving. What exactly happened? I asked Ethan. His voice cracked. "Grandpa said you'd never amount to anything." I felt my jaw tighten. And then I told him to stop talking about you like that. A pause. Then Grandpa said if I liked defending losers so much, I could leave with one. For a second I couldn't speak. "He threw you out?" "Yeah." "Where's your mother?" The silence lasted long enough to tell me everything. Finally, Ethan whispered. "She said I should just apologize." Something inside me went cold. Not angry. Cold. The kind of cold that settles deep and never leaves. "I'm coming," I said. I hung up. Then I drove. 48 miles. 31 minutes. I don't remember most of the drive. I remember the darkness, the rain, and the growing realization that my son had learned something that night. He had learned exactly where he ranked in his mother's family. When I arrived, he was sitting on the front steps. Cold, wet, alone. Inside the house, I could see people laughing through the dining room window. Nobody had come outside. Not one person. I wrapped my coat around Ethan. Then I walked toward the front door. And for the first time in 10 years, I stopped caring about keeping the peace. Because what I was about to say would destroy every lie my wife had spent a decade protecting. And before the night was over, her entire family was going to learn exactly who I was. I opened the front door without knocking. The laughter stopped immediately. 10 people sat around the dining table. Turkey, wine glasses, desserts, a perfect family holiday scene. Except my son had been sitting outside in the rain while they enjoyed it. Richard looked up first. "There he is," he said. The warehouse guy finally showed up. Nobody laughed. For the first time, the room felt uncomfortable. Melissa stood up. "Daniel, let's not do this here." I looked at her. My wife of 19 years, the woman who had just allowed our son to be thrown out of Thanksgiving dinner. You let him sit outside. It wasn't like that. Ethan stepped in behind me. Every head turned toward him. Richard rolled his eyes. "Oh, for God's sake." The kid overreacted. My hands clenched. "You threw my son out of your house." I taught him respect. "No," I said. "You taught him exactly who you are." Richard stood up. The room immediately became tense. Watch your tone. For 10 years, I had listened to this man insult me. 10 years of comments. 10 years of jokes. 10 years of pretending I didn't care. But this wasn't about me anymore. You know what? Richard said, maybe if you had provided a better life, your son wouldn't be so sensitive. The room went silent. Even Melissa looked shocked. Richard continued, you're nearly 50 years old and still working with your hands. I laughed, actually laughed, and that confused everyone. What is so funny? He demanded. I looked around the room. At Melissa, at her brother Kevin, at her mother Susan, at all the people who had spent years treating me like I wasn't good enough. Then I asked a simple question. How much do you think I make? Richard smirked. Enough to keep the lights on, I suppose. A few uncomfortable smiles appeared. I nodded slowly. Interesting. Melissa immediately knew where this was going. Her face went pale. Daniel, don't. I turned toward her. Don't what? Please. It was the first time she sounded nervous all night. That told me everything. She wasn't protecting me. She was protecting the lie. The same lie that had allowed her family to disrespect me for a decade. Richard folded his arms. What exactly are we talking about? I pulled out my phone. 3 taps. 1 email. Then I placed the phone in front of him. He frowned. What is this? A company report. So, look at the name. His eyes moved across the screen, then stopped. Titan Logistics. The color slowly drained from his face. Kevin leaned over his shoulder. A second later, his expression changed too. Richard looked up. What is this supposed to mean? It means I own the company. Nobody spoke. Not one person. I could almost hear people breathing. Richard stared at me. No, you don't. I founded it. No. I nodded. Yes. Kevin grabbed the phone. His eyes scanned the report. Revenue figures. Executive listings. Ownership records. Everything. The room became completely silent. Melissa looked like she wanted to disappear. Finally, Susan spoke. Daniel, are these numbers real? I looked at her. They're from last quarter. Richard pushed the phone away. This is nonsense. It isn't. It has to be. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because I could see the realization hitting him. Every joke, every insult, every comment he'd made over the years. All of them suddenly looked very different. Then Ethan spoke. The first words he'd said since entering the house. You threw me out because Dad wasn't good enough for you. Nobody answered, because nobody could. Richard looked at my son and opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. I turned toward Melissa. What did you tell them all these years? She looked down. That was answer enough. My stomach sank, because suddenly I realized something. This wasn't just Richard. This wasn't just her family. Melissa had helped create this situation. She had allowed it, encouraged it, protected it. For years. What else have you lied about? I asked quietly. Her head snapped up. Daniel. What else? She looked terrified. Not guilty. Terrified. And that was when I knew there was something bigger going on. Something she didn't want discussed in front of her family. Then Kevin suddenly stood up. His face had gone completely white. He was staring at the company report, at a specific page. A page I hadn't even noticed. Wait, he said. Nobody moved. Kevin looked at me, then at Melissa, then back at me. His voice barely came out. Daniel, why is Melissa listed as an authorized executive on company accounts? The room froze. I turned toward my wife, and the expression on her face told me everything before she said a single word. Something was very, very wrong. The room went completely silent. I looked at Melissa. She looked at Kevin. Then she looked at the floor. That was all the answer I needed. My stomach dropped. Melissa, I said quietly, why are you listed on company accounts? Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Finally, she swallowed. I can explain. I laughed once. A short, humorless laugh. Then explain. Richard looked confused. What is he talking about? Melissa rubbed her forehead. When Daniel started Titan Logistics, I helped with some paperwork. I asked. Kevin was still staring at the report. No, this isn't paperwork. He pointed at the screen. She's listed as an authorized signer. My pulse quickened. That wasn't possible. I personally reviewed every executive authorization 6 months earlier. There should have been only 3 names on that list. Mine, my CFO's, my legal controllers. Not Melissa. Never Melissa. I grabbed the phone and scrolled through the report myself. Then I saw it. She was right there. Authorized access. Limited financial permissions. Added 18 months ago. My heart started pounding. I never approved that. I knew I hadn't, because I would have remembered. Who added this? I asked. Melissa looked trapped. Daniel. Who added it? Nobody in the room dared speak. Finally, she whispered, "You signed the authorization." I stared at her. "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." "Show me." Her face changed. Just slightly. But enough. She couldn't. And she knew it. Then a memory hit me. 18 months earlier, I had been traveling constantly during a major warehouse acquisition. Melissa had brought several documents to the house for signatures. Tax forms, insurance renewals, routine paperwork. I signed dozens of pages that month. Most business owners do. Trusting the wrong person makes it dangerous. My mouth went dry. "What did you do?" The question came out quieter than I intended. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. That terrified me more than anything, because guilty people cry when the truth is close. "Daniel, please listen." "No." I took a step forward. "What did you do?" Kevin suddenly spoke. "Melissa." She looked at him. His face had gone pale. "Tell him." The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Then she finally said it. "I borrowed money." My entire body froze. "What?" It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "How much?" She didn't answer. "How much?" Another pause. Then she whispered, 320,000. The number hit me like a punch. Richard nearly dropped his wine glass. Susan gasped. Kevin sat down hard in his chair. $320,000. Gone. Without my knowledge. Without my permission. Without a single conversation. I felt sick. "Where is it?" Melissa started crying. "It wasn't for me. I didn't care. Where is it?" She pointed toward her father. The room exploded. Richard jumped to his feet. "Don't you dare drag me into this. You asked me for help." Melissa shouted. Everyone froze, including me. Richard looked horrified. "What are you doing?" "Telling the truth." My father-in-law suddenly looked 10 years older. Melissa wiped tears from her face. "Dad lost almost everything 2 years ago." I frowned. "What?" Nobody had mentioned financial trouble. Ever. Not once. Melissa laughed bitterly. "Because he didn't want anyone to know." The story came out piece by piece. Bad investments. Debt. Personal loans. Credit problems. A failed business venture. Richard had spent years pretending to be wealthy while secretly drowning. And 18 months ago, he asked Melissa for help. Instead of coming to me, instead of telling the truth, she accessed company funds, money she never had permission to touch, and transferred it through multiple accounts, all to save her father. I couldn't believe it. 10 years. 10 years of insults. 10 years of being treated like I wasn't good enough. Meanwhile, I had unknowingly funded the man mocking me. The irony was almost unbelievable. Then Kevin asked a question nobody wanted answered. Did Daniel's company ever get paid back? Melissa started crying harder. Richard looked away. And suddenly I knew. The answer was no. Not a single dollar. The room fell silent. I looked at my wife. Really looked at her. And for the first time in our marriage, I realized I didn't know who she was. Then my phone rang. It was my CFO. At nearly 9 o'clock at night. That never happened. A cold feeling ran down my spine. I answered immediately. "What's wrong?" There was a long pause. Then he said 5 words that changed everything. "Daniel, we found more transfers." My stomach dropped. How much more? The silence lasted 2 seconds, but it felt like an hour. When he finally answered, every person in the room saw the color leave my face, because the amount wasn't hundreds of thousands. It was over $1 million. And according to the records, Melissa wasn't the only person involved. For a moment, I thought I had heard my CFO wrong. Say that again. The room was so quiet that everyone could hear my side of the conversation. We found additional transfers, he repeated. A lot of them. How much? Just over $1 million. My legs nearly gave out. Across the room, Melissa started crying harder. Richard sat frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I walked out onto the front porch and closed the door behind me. The cold air hit my face. What exactly did you find? My CFO took a breath. The initial transfer started 18 months ago, but after reviewing the authorization logs, we discovered multiple payments routed through vendor accounts. My stomach sank. Are they legitimate vendors? No. I closed my eyes. Tell me. 3 shell companies. The words hit like a hammer. Shell companies. Fake businesses. Created for one purpose. Moving money. Who owns them? There was a pause. We don't know yet. I looked through the window at Melissa. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. Then my CFO said something worse. We found authorization records. My pulse quickened. What kind of records? Digital approvals. I frowned. And another pause. Daniel, your credentials were used. The realization hit me immediately. Someone hadn't just taken money. Someone had impersonated me. This is criminal. Yes. I stood there staring into the darkness. Because this wasn't a marital dispute anymore. This wasn't family drama. This was fraud. Real fraud. The kind that destroys companies. The kind that sends people to prison. I hung up and walked back inside. Every eye in the room followed me. I looked directly at Melissa. Who else was involved? She shook her head. Daniel. Who else? Tears streamed down her face. Finally, she whispered, my brother. Kevin's face went white. What? You knew about some of it? No. Stop lying. The room exploded into shouting. Kevin stood up so quickly his chair tipped backward. I never took any money. You helped move it. I did accounting work. You knew those companies weren't real. Richard grabbed the edge of the table. Enough. Nobody listened. Years of secrets were pouring out at once. Years of lies. Years of manipulation. Then Susan suddenly spoke. Her voice barely above a whisper. I knew, too. Everything stopped. Richard turned toward her. What? Susan started crying. You told me it was temporary. The room felt like it was collapsing. One confession after another. One lie after another. And every single one pointed back to the same thing. The entire family had known pieces of the truth. Nobody had told me. Not one person. For nearly 2 years. I looked at Melissa. How long were you planning the divorce? Her eyes widened. The question landed exactly where I wanted it to, because suddenly she looked terrified. Not sad. Terrified. That told me everything. How long? She said nothing. Kevin looked confused. Richard looked confused. Only Melissa knew why I was asking. Then I understood. The divorce wasn't about ending the marriage. It was about escaping before the fraud was discovered. The realization made me sick. That's why you wanted the divorce. Daniel, please. You knew this was coming. She broke down completely. And that was all the answer I needed. She knew. Somewhere along the way, she realized the scheme would eventually be exposed. The divorce was her exit strategy, a way to separate herself before everything collapsed. I suddenly remembered something. The divorce papers. The way my income had been described. The way company ownership had been omitted. The way my assets had been undervalued. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Someone had been preparing for this. Then my phone buzzed again. A text message. From my attorney. I opened it immediately. The message contained only one sentence. Do not discuss anything further. We have enough evidence. Call me immediately. My heart started racing. Because Robert never sent messages like that. Ever. I stepped away and called him. He answered instantly. Daniel, where are you? At Melissa's parents' house. Leave. What happened? There was a long pause. Then Robert spoke, and the words that came out of his mouth made everything else seem small. We traced the shell companies. My stomach tightened. Who owns them? Silence. Then, one of them is registered in Melissa's name. I closed my eyes. Okay. The second belongs to Kevin. I wasn't surprised anymore. Then Robert delivered the final blow. The third company. He stopped. For the first time in 10 years, I heard uncertainty in his voice. Robert, you need to sit down. My heart pounded. Who owns it? There was a pause. A long one. Then he finally answered. The third company is registered to your son. I stopped breathing. Because Ethan had never opened a company in his life, which meant someone had used my 17-year-old son's identity. And whoever did it had just committed a crime far bigger than simple fraud. I couldn't process what Robert had just told me. The company is registered to Ethan? Yes. My hand tightened around the phone. That's impossible. I know. Ethan was 17. He had never started a business, never opened a corporate account, never signed legal documents, which meant someone had used his identity. Someone close enough to access his personal information. Someone he trusted. I already knew who. I walked back into the house. Every face turned toward me. Melissa looked terrified. Richard looked exhausted. Kevin looked like he wanted to disappear. And Ethan was standing near the doorway, confused about why everyone suddenly looked guilty. I looked directly at Melissa. You used our son's identity. The room froze. Ethan frowned. What? Melissa immediately broke down. Daniel, please let me explain. There is no explanation. Tears streamed down her face. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Those words told me everything. She had done it. She knew it. And now everyone else knew it too. Ethan stared at his mother. Mom, what is he talking about? She couldn't answer. Not immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice barely worked. We needed help. The look on Ethan's face broke my heart. Because he wasn't angry. Not yet. He was hurt. Confused, betrayed, the kind of betrayal that changes how you see people forever. I stepped toward him. None of this is your fault. He nodded slowly, but I could see the damage already being done. The truth was finally out, and there was no putting it back. I left with Ethan that night. Neither of us said much during the drive home. Some betrayals are too large for immediate conversation. They require silence first. The legal process moved quickly after that, much faster than anyone expected. My attorney filed emergency motions. The forensic investigators completed their reports. The shell companies were examined. Every transfer was traced. Every signature was analyzed, and the results were devastating. Melissa had created the first company. Kevin had operated the second. The third company, the one using Ethan's identity, had been created using information supplied by both of them. Neither had expected anyone to look closely. Neither had expected the audit. Neither had expected the truth to surface. They were wrong. By February, criminal investigators were involved. By March, formal charges had been filed against Kevin. Several financial penalties followed. Multiple accounts were frozen. The remaining money was recovered wherever possible. As for Melissa, the divorce process changed dramatically. The moment the fraud reports entered evidence, her strategy collapsed. The hidden accounts, the missing funds, the false financial disclosures, everything became part of the record. The woman who had tried to portray me as an ordinary employee was suddenly being questioned about six-figure transfers and concealed assets. Her attorney eventually stopped fighting and started negotiating. The settlement was finalized 4 months later. She received what the law entitled her to. Nothing more. The house she assumed she would keep wasn't hers. The majority of the assets she expected didn't exist in the form she believed. And the financial future she'd spent more than a year planning vanished almost overnight. But the hardest consequence wasn't financial. It was personal. Ethan moved in with me permanently. That wasn't my decision. It was his. One evening, months after everything happened, he sat across from me at dinner. The same kid who'd been left outside on Thanksgiving. The same kid whose identity had been stolen. Dad, yeah, I'm glad I called you that night. I looked up. He smiled slightly. So, am I? Then He said something I'll never forget. If Grandpa never threw me out, none of this would have come out. He was right. The moment meant to humiliate us had exposed everyone else instead. Richard called several times over the following months. I never answered. Eventually, he left a voicemail, an apology, a real one, not for misunderstanding who I was, not for underestimating my success, for how he treated me when he thought I had none. That distinction mattered, because the money was never the point. The company was never the point. Respect was. And respect shouldn't depend on someone's bank account. Today, almost 2 years later, Titan Logistics is larger than it's ever been. We've expanded into 3 new states. Our workforce has doubled. The business is thriving. But the thing I'm most proud of isn't any of that. It's my relationship with my son. We rebuilt our lives together, without lies, without pretending, without anyone deciding our worth based on appearances. Sometimes people ask if I regret staying silent for so many years. The answer is yes. Not because I hid my success, because I hid who I was. The moment you allow people to disrespect you for the sake of keeping peace, you begin paying for that peace with pieces of yourself. I paid that price for 10 years. Never again. The night my son was thrown out of Thanksgiving dinner felt like the worst night of my life. Looking back, it was a night everything finally became honest. And sometimes the people trying hardest to throw you out of their lives accidentally show you exactly who deserves a place in yours. The family I lost was built on lies. The family I kept was built on truth.